Sometimes a single act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes it reveals what truly matters in life. In the dusty cattle country of western Colorado, Thaddeus McAllister built his fortune on tight-fisted control and cold calculation. Every penny counted, every resource measured when he caught his gentlest ranch hand, feeding a starving donkey with expensive winter hay. He did what came naturally. He fired the man without a second thought, but that scrawny donkey was no ordinary stray. She was the leader of something far bigger than Thaddeus could imagine. What happened next would turn his entire world upside down and teach him a lesson about mercy he would never forget. How could one simple act of compassion cost a rancher everything he thought he controlled? Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The McAllister Ranch stretched across 12,000 acres of prime grazing land in the western valleys of Colorado, where the high desert met the foothills and the grass grew thick enough to fatten cattle through 3 seasons. From the main house on the ridge, you could see clear to the San Juan Mountains on a good day, their peaks still holding snow even in late September. It was country that made men dream of empires, and Thaddeus McAllister had built his empire one calculated decision at a time. Thaddeus stood on his wraparound porch every morning at 5:30, coffee in hand, surveying his domain with the sharp eye of a man who counted everything. He was 62 years old, tall and lean as a fence post. With silver hair he kept trim and a mustache that drooped at the corners in the old style. His face had been carved by wind and sun into something that looked like it belonged on currency. He wore pressed Wranglers and starched shirts, even for ranch work, and his boots held a shine that most men reserved for Sunday services. The ranch hands called him tight-fist behind his back, though never where he might hear. The nickname had started 15 years ago, when he had docked a cowboy's pay for using 3 feet more rope than necessary on a fence repair. Since then, the legend had only grown. Thaddeus kept a ledger in his office where he tracked every expense down to the penny. Feed costs, fuel consumption, even the amount of soap used in the bunkhouse. He believed that waste was the enemy of profit, and profit was the only true measure of a man's worth. His wife, Margaret, had left him 8 years before, taking their daughter Sarah to live in Denver. She had told him on her way out that he had forgotten how to be human, that he loved his ledgers more than his family. Thaddeus had let her go without protest. Emotions were expensive, and he had a ranch to run. He hired a housekeeper named Rosa, who came 3 times a week, and he ate his meals alone at a long dining table that could seat 12. The ranch employed 7 full-time hands, though Thaddeus believed he could get by with 5 if everyone worked a little harder. There was old Chet, the foreman, who had been with the ranch since Thaddeus's father ran it. Chet was 68 and walked with a limp from a horse accident 20 years back, but he knew every inch of the property and could predict weather by the way the cattle moved. There were the Martinez brothers, Carlos and Luis, who handled most of the heavy labor and spoke more Spanish than English between themselves. There was young Tommy Hendricks, barely 23, who fancied himself a rodeo star and was always 1 paycheck away from quitting to chase that dream. There was Raymond, a quiet black man from Texas, who was the best horseman Thaddeus had ever seen, though Thaddeus would never say so out loud. And there was Walt, a crusty old bachelor who drank too much on weekends, but could fix any piece of machinery on the ranch with little more than baling wire and stubbornness. The newest hire was Bo Lattimore, and he had only been on the ranch for 6 weeks. Bo was a gentle giant, 6'4", and built like a draft horse, with shoulders that filled doorways and hands that looked like they could bend horseshoes. But despite his size, he moved with an easy, unhurried grace that put animals at ease. He had a round, open face that seemed incapable of guile, pale blue eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a smile that came readily. He wore his sandy hair long enough to tuck behind his ears, and he had a habit of humming old hymns while he worked. Bo had drifted in from Wyoming, following the circuit of ranch work that many cowboys still traveled. He had good references and asked for fair wages, and Thaddeus had hired him because he needed an extra hand for the fall roundup. Bo bunked with the other hands in the long, low building behind the main barn, where each man had a narrow bed, a footlocker, and not much else. The bunkhouse smelled of wood smoke, boot leather, and the perpetual coffee that simmered on the pot-bellied stove. The other hands liked Bo well enough. He did not complain, he pulled his weight, and he had a way of diffusing tensions with a soft word or a self-deprecating joke. Chet appreciated that Bo listened to instruction and did not need to be told things twice. The Martinez brothers taught him Spanish curse words, which he repeated with his thick Wyoming drawl, making everyone laugh. Even Raymond, who kept mostly to himself, seemed to relax around Bo's easy presence. But Thaddeus watched Bo with a critical eye. He had noticed that Bo lingered with the horses longer than necessary, that he talked to them in low, soothing tones while he brushed them down. He had seen Bo slip extra grain to an older mare who was losing weight, though Thaddeus had already calculated her feed ration to the ounce. These were small infractions, but they bothered Thaddeus in a way he could not quite articulate. They suggested a softness, a sentimentality that had no place on a working ranch. The trouble started on a cold Tuesday morning in late September. Frost had painted the grass silver, and the air tasted like winter coming down from the high country. Thaddeus had walked out to the south pasture before dawn to check on a section of fence that Chet said needed repair. He carried a flashlight in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, his breath steaming in the pre-dawn darkness. As he approached the hay barn on the south end of the property, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. It was a low, mournful sound, somewhere between a groan and a cry. Thaddeus killed his flashlight and stood very still, listening. The sound came again, and with it he heard the soft murmur of a human voice. He moved quietly toward the barn, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The big sliding door was open just wide enough for a man to slip through. Inside, a single lantern cast a warm glow against the stacked bales of winter hay, and there, in the circle of that light, was Bo Lattimore, kneeling beside the sorriest excuse for a donkey that Thaddeus had ever seen. The animal was small, barely 12 hands high, with a coat the color of dust and ribs that stood out like barrel staves. Her hip bones jutted sharply, and her head hung low, nearly touching the ground. But she was eating. Bo had spread out a thick pile of premium winter alfalfa, the expensive stuff Thaddeus had trucked in from Utah at considerable cost, and the donkey was tearing into it with desperate hunger. Bo knelt beside her, one massive hand resting gently on her withers, and he was singing, not humming, but actually singing in a low, tender voice. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound, Bo sang softly, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Thaddeus felt something hot and fierce rise in his chest. It was not quite anger yet, but it was close. He took 3 long steps into the barn, and his voice cracked like a whip across the quiet space. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Bo jerked upright, his eyes going wide. The donkey startled and tried to back away, but she was too weak to move quickly. Bo placed himself between Thaddeus and the animal, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Boss, I can explain. That is $70 a bale alfalfa you are wasting on a goddamn stray burro, Thaddeus said, his voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what that hay costs? Do you have any concept of the margins we operate on? She was starving, Bo said quietly. His voice held no defiance, only a simple statement of fact. She came up to the fence yesterday evening, barely able to stand. You could not just what? Follow the instructions you were hired to follow? Thaddeus stepped closer, and in the lantern light, his face looked carved from stone. This is not a charity, Lattimore. This is a working cattle ranch. We do not feed strays. We do not waste resources on animals that do not produce income. She is just a donkey, Bo said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice now. She needed help. She is a drain on my resources, Thaddeus corrected. And you are a thief. The word hung in the air between them. Bo's face went pale. I was going to tell you, Bo said. I was going to ask if I could buy the hay from you. Take it out of my wages. You are already fired, Thaddeus said flatly. I want you off my property by sunrise. Pack your gear and get out. Mr. McAllister, I said get out. Thaddeus took another step forward, and despite his 62 years, there was something in his posture that suggested violence was not far below the surface. And take that mangy burro with you. I do not care where you go or what you do with it, but if I see either one of you on my land after sunrise, I will call the sheriff and have you arrested for theft. Do I make myself clear? Bo looked at him for a long moment. In the lantern light, his face held an expression that Thaddeus could not quite read. It was not anger or resentment. It was something softer and sadder, something that looked almost like pity. Then Bo nodded slowly. Yes, sir, he said quietly, crystal clear. He turned back to the donkey and gathered up what remained of the hay, stuffing it into a feed sack. The donkey watched him with large, dark eyes. Bo tied the sack closed, and then, with infinite gentleness, slipped a rope halter over the donkey's head. Come on, girl, he said softly. Let us get you somewhere safe. He led the donkey past Thaddeus without another word. The animal walked with a painful, shuffling gait, her hooves dragging slightly. Thaddeus watched them go, his jaw set and his hands clenched at his sides. He felt vindicated, righteous. He had protected his property and maintained the standards that made his ranch successful. But as the sound of Bo's boots and the donkey's hooves faded into the darkness, something cold settled in Thaddeus's chest. He pushed it away. Sentiment was expensive, and he had a ranch to run. The other hands were awake when Bo returned to the bunkhouse, leading the starving donkey. Chet had just poured the first round of coffee, and the men stood around the pot-bellied stove in their long johns and socks, trying to shake off the night's cold. They all stopped and stared when Bo walked in with the animal. What in the world? Chet said. I got fired, Bo said simply. He tied the donkey to a post outside and came in to gather his things. His face was calm, but his hands shook slightly as he opened his footlocker. The other hands exchanged glances. Carlos was the first to speak. For what, man? Fed the donkey some of the boss's hay, Bo said. He pulled out his extra pair of jeans, 2 shirts, and his spare boots. Everything he owned in the world fit in a single duffel bag and a pair of saddlebags. He called it theft. Jesus, Tommy said. That is harsh, even for tight fist. Where will you go? Raymond asked quietly. Bo shrugged it. I will figure something out. There is always work somewhere. He finished packing in silence. The other men wanted to say something, to protest or offer help, but they all had families or debts or reasons they could not afford to lose their own jobs. So they watched as Bo slung his duffel over his shoulder, gathered his saddle and tack, and headed back outside. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue. Bo loaded his gear onto the old pickup truck he drove, a rusted Ford from the 1980s that ran on prayer and stubbornness. Then he loaded the donkey into the bed, laying down a tarp first so she would not slip on the metal. The animal stood with her head hanging low, too exhausted to resist. You take care, Bo, Chet called from the bunkhouse door. You too, Chet, Bo called back. All of you. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. It coughed twice before turning over. Then he drove slowly down the long gravel drive that led away from the ranch, the donkey swaying in the truck bed, his entire life packed into 2 bags. He did not look back. Thaddeus watched from his porch as the taillights disappeared down the drive. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the mountains gold and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day. He finished his coffee and went inside to update his ledgers. He would need to adjust his labor costs now that he was down a hand. Maybe he could get by without replacing Bo until after the winter. That would save considerable money. The thought pleased him. He sat at his desk in the study, a dark paneled room lined with filing cabinets and framed photographs of prize cattle. He opened his leather-bound ledger and began making notes in his precise, cramped handwriting. But as he worked, he found his mind wandering back to the image of Bo, kneeling beside that starving donkey, singing a hymn in the darkness. He frowned and shook his head. Sentiment was expensive. He had done the right thing. Outside, the world went on without him. The sun climbed higher. The cattle moved slowly across the pastures, grazing on the frost-sweet grass. And in the canyon lands to the south, where the rocky draws and hidden valleys held secrets that few men ever discovered, something stirred. A message had been sent. A signal given, and the world was about to answer in a way that Thaddeus McAllister could never have imagined. Thaddeus woke at 5:30 the next morning, exactly as he always did. His internal clock was better than any alarm, honed by 60 years of discipline and routine. He showered, shaved with a straight razor the way his father had taught him, and dressed in a fresh pair of Wranglers and a pressed blue shirt. He made his coffee in the French press that Margaret had left behind, measuring the grounds with precision, 3 level tablespoons. No more, no less. He carried his coffee out onto the porch as the first light broke over the mountains. The air was cold and clean, sharp enough to make his eyes water. He took a deep breath and smiled. This was his favorite moment of every day, this quiet dominion over land and sky and beast. He was master here. He controlled every variable. Nothing happened on the McAllister ranch that he did not will into existence. He raised his coffee cup to his lips and then stopped. He lowered the cup slowly, his eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. The view from his porch had changed. His south pasture, the pristine stretch of manicured grass where he ran his best breeding stock, was no longer empty. It was full, completely, impossibly full, and the things filling it were moving. Thaddeus set his coffee cup down on the porch rail with a hand that had started to shake. He descended the steps slowly, never taking his eyes off the pasture. As he got closer, as the morning light grew stronger, the impossible scene resolved into terrible clarity. Donkeys. Hundreds of them. They covered his south pasture like a living carpet, their bodies pressed close together, their ears swiveling toward him as he approached. Small ones and large ones, dark ones and light ones. Donkeys in every shade from charcoal grey to warm brown to pale cream. They stood silent and watching, and in that silence was something that raised the hair on the back of Thaddeus's neck. He reached the fence and gripped the top rail with both hands. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. This was not possible. Where had they come from? There had been nothing here last night. Nothing. He had walked the property at sunset. The pasture had been empty, except for his 20 head of Black Angus cattle, and now the cattle were nowhere to be seen, pushed to the far edges of the field by the sheer mass of braying, shifting donkey flesh, and in the center of that mass, standing calm and unhurried beside his battered pickup truck, was Bo Lattimore. He was loading his saddlebags with the same careful patience he brought to every task, and around him, forming a protective circle, were at least 30 donkeys. They stood shoulder to shoulder, facing outward, their eyes fixed on Thaddeus. "What the hell?" Thaddeus breathed. His voice came out strangled, barely more than a whisper. He climbed over the fence, moving on autopilot, his brain unable to fully comprehend what was happening. He walked toward Bo, and as he did, the wall of donkeys shifted. They did not scatter or run. They closed ranks, tightening their circle around the man and his truck. Several of the larger jacks, the intact males, lowered their heads and pinned their ears back. One of them, a massive grey with a Roman nose and scarred flanks, took 2 steps forward and bared his teeth. Thaddeus stopped walking. He was not a coward, but he was also not a fool. A mature jack donkey could kill a man if it wanted to. They were territorial, fierce, and utterly fearless when defending what they considered theirs, and these donkeys had clearly claimed Beau Lattimore as their own. "Lattimore!" Thaddeus shouted. His voice cracked, the authority draining out of it. "What the hell is going on? What did you do?" Beau looked up from his packing. His expression was mild, almost serene. "Morning, Mr. McAllister. I am just finishing up here. I will be gone in a few minutes." "Gone? You—" Thaddeus gestured wildly at the sea of donkeys surrounding them. "Where did these animals come from? Did you do this? Did you bring them here?" "No, sir," Beau said. He buckled the strap on his saddlebag and tested the weight. "I did not bring them anywhere. They came on their own. That is impossible, is it?" Beau's pale blue eyes met Thaddeus's, and there was something in that gaze that made the older man look away. "The little Jenny I fed? The one you fired me for helping? She called them. I did not know she would. I did not even know there were this many wild burrows in the canyon lands. But she called them and they came." Thaddeus opened his mouth and then closed it. His mind was racing, trying to find purchase on something, anything that made sense. "You need to get them off my land. All of them. Now." "I am working on that," Beau said. He lifted his saddle and carried it to the truck, the donkeys parting to let him through. "But they seem pretty set on staying close to me right now. I figure they will follow when I leave." 200 donkeys, Thaddeus said. The number came out like an accusation. "There must be 200 of them. Closer to 210, I would guess," Beau said. "I have been counting. They are destroying my pasture. They are—" Thaddeus looked around wildly, taking in the churned earth, the scattered cattle, the complete disruption of his carefully managed land. "They are costing me thousands of dollars." "Yes, sir," Beau said quietly. "I expect they are." There was something in his tone that made Thaddeus's blood pressure spike. "You think this is funny?" "No, sir. I think it is sad." Beau hoisted the last of his gear into the truck bed. The small Jenny, the one who started it all, stood at the tailgate. She looked better this morning, stronger. Her eyes were brighter. Beau reached out and scratched behind her ears, and she leaned into his touch with obvious trust. "Sad," Thaddeus repeated. "You have vandalized my property. You have." "I fed a starving animal," Beau interrupted, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice. "That is what I did. I gave a creature that was dying a chance to live, and you fired me for it. You called me a thief. You told me that compassion was waste." "This is a business," Thaddeus said, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Yes, sir, it is," Beau agreed, "and you run it like one. But land like this, animals like these, they are not just numbers in a ledger. They are alive. They feel, they remember, and sometimes, Mr. McAllister, they remember kindness." He climbed into his truck and started the engine. The donkeys began to shift, moving away from Thaddeus, flowing toward Beau's truck like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The Jenny jumped down from the tailgate and took up a position at the front of the truck, her head held high. Beau leaned out the window. "I will drive slow. They will follow me off your property. You should have your pasture back by noon." "Wait," Thaddeus said, and he was surprised by the desperation in his own voice. "Just wait a damn minute." Beau paused, his hand on the gear shift. He looked at Thaddeus with those calm, patient eyes, waiting, and Thaddeus found he had no idea what to say. His mind was full of half-formed protests, calculations of costs and losses, outrage at the disruption of his perfectly ordered world. But beneath all of that, something else was stirring, something that felt almost like shame. One of the donkeys near the front of the herd, an older Jenny with a distinctive white blaze on her face, turned her head to look at Thaddeus, and on her left shoulder, barely visible beneath the dust and dried mud, was a mark, a brand. Thaddeus squinted, took 3 steps closer, and felt his heart skip a beat. The brand was military, U.S. Army, and below it, partially obscured but still legible, were numbers, an identification code. Thaddeus's mouth went dry. He looked at the next donkey, and the next. They all had brands. Some were military. Some were Bureau of Land Management. But one in particular caught his attention. A large, well-built jack near the center of the herd bore a brand that Thaddeus recognized because he had seen it in the news 6 months ago. It was the brand of a private contractor that had been transporting silver bullion for the Denver Mint when an entire convoy of pack animals had vanished without a trace in the San Juan wilderness. "Oh my God," Thaddeus whispered. Bo had seen where he was looking. A small, sad smile crossed his face. "You see it now, do not you? These are not wild burros," Thaddeus said slowly. "These are lost army pack mules mostly," Bo confirmed. "BLM animals that got loose during a wildfire. And yes, some of them are from that silver shipment that went missing last spring. The matriarch there, the one I fed, she was part of that convoy. She still has traces of the load markers on her pack harness." Thaddeus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The silver shipment. There had been a substantial reward posted for any information leading to the recovery of those animals. $50,000, maybe more. And if the animals were recovered with the silver, still cached somewhere in the canyon lands. "You knew," Thaddeus said. "You knew what she was." "No, sir," Bo said. "I did not know until this morning when I saw the IDE brands. I just saw a starving animal that needed help. The rest, well, that is just how things worked out. But now!" Thaddeus's mind was racing, calculating. "Now you have salvage rights. These animals trust you. You are the only one who can lead them out of here. The reward is mine, I suppose," Bo said, "by right of care and recovery. At least that is what I expect the law will say." "You son of a bitch," Thaddeus breathed. "You planned this." "No, sir," Bo said again, and his voice was infinitely patient, infinitely kind. "I did not plan anything. I just did the right thing. And sometimes, Mr. McAllister, the right thing has a way of working out. Not always, not even often, but sometimes." He put the truck in gear. The donkeys began to move, flowing around the vehicle like water. Thaddeus stood frozen, watching his pasture empty, watching 200 donkeys and $50,000 walk away from him, behind a cowboy he had fired for the crime of kindness. "Wait," he called out again. His voice was raw now, stripped of all authority. "Lattimore, wait. We can talk about this. I was too hasty. I made a mistake. Come back and we will work something out." But Bo was already driving away, the truck moving at a walking pace, the donkeys following in a great, braying river. The sound of their voices filled the valley, echoing off the mountains. And Thaddeus McAllister, who had spent his entire life building an empire of control and calculation, stood alone in his churned and ruined pasture and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight of his own choices. The bunkhouse was silent when Thaddeus walked in 20 minutes later. The hands had watched the whole scene from the windows, and they knew better than to speak first. Thaddeus stood in the doorway, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Get me the number for the county sheriff," he said to Chet, "and then get me a lawyer. I need to know about salvage law, lost property, and reward rights. I need to know it right now." But even as he said it, he knew it was too late. The damage was done, the lesson had been taught, and all the lawyers and ledgers in the world could not change the simple fact that he had fired a good man for doing a good thing, and the universe had responded with perfect, poetic justice. Chet looked at his boss with an expression Thaddeus had never seen before. It was not quite pity, but it was close. The old foreman moved slowly to the shelf where they kept the phone book, his limp more pronounced than usual. The other hand stood frozen, coffee cups halfway to their lips, watching the drama unfold. "Boss," Chet said carefully, "I am not sure a lawyer is going to help you here. Just get me the number," Thaddeus snapped. Then, hearing the harshness in his own voice, he added more quietly, "Please." Carlos Martinez stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Mr. McAllister, if I may say something, not now, Carlos. But, sir, I think you should know that Bo, he did not mean any harm. He is a good man. He could not stand to see that animal suffer. I said not now, Thaddeus repeated, but there was less fire in it this time. He sank onto one of the wooden benches that lined the bunkhouse wall and put his head in his hands. The other men exchanged glances, unsure whether to leave or stay. Tommy Hendricks, the young rodeo hopeful, cleared his throat. So, are we going to talk about the 200 donkeys that just left? Because that was the craziest thing I have ever seen in my life. Tommy, shut up, Raymond said quietly. I am just saying. Shut up! Thaddeus looked up at them. These men who worked his land and followed his orders and called him tight-fist when they thought he could not hear. They were looking at him differently now. There was something in their eyes that had not been there before. Not quite contempt, but something close. Disappointment, maybe, or loss of respect. You all think I was wrong, Thaddeus said. It was not a question. No one answered at first. Then Chet, who had known 3 generations of McAllisters, spoke up. I think you did what you thought was right, but I also think you let the ledger do your thinking for you instead of your heart. My heart? Thaddeus's laugh was bitter. My heart does not pay your wages, Chet. My heart does not keep this ranch profitable. My heart, your heart is what makes this place worth working on, Chet interrupted, his voice firm. Your daddy knew that. He was a hard man, but he was fair. He understood that you treat animals with respect, you treat your men with dignity, and you do not punish kindness. That is what made this ranch something more than just a business. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that. The words hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain all the careful calculations that kept the ranch running, but the words would not come. Because deep down, in a place he had not looked in a very long time, he knew Chet was right. He is going to get that reward money, Thaddeus said finally. $75,000, maybe more. All because he did the right thing, Chet finished. And the world rewarded him for it. That is not injustice, boss. That is just the way things should work. Thaddeus stood up abruptly. I need to check the damage to the south pasture. See how much reseeding we will need to do. Calculate the loss. Boss, I need to work, Thaddeus said, and his voice cracked on the last word. I just need to work. He walked out of the bunkhouse into the bright morning sun. The day was already warming up, the frost melting from the grass. In the distance, he could see his cattle slowly making their way back into the south pasture, reclaiming their territory now that the donkeys were gone. Everything looked normal. Everything looked the same as it always had, but nothing felt the same. Thaddeus spent the rest of the morning walking the pasture, examining the churned earth, making notes in a small notebook he always carried. The damage was significant. The grass was torn up in places, trampled flat in others. There were hoof prints everywhere, hundreds upon hundreds of them, a testament to the impossible thing that had happened here. He would need to reseed at least 5 acres, maybe more. The cost would be substantial. But as he walked and calculated and made his notes, his mind kept returning to the image of Bo driving away, the donkeys following like he was some kind of Pied Piper, and beneath the anger and the wounded pride and the sense of injustice, something else was growing. A small, uncomfortable seed of doubt. Had he been wrong? The question felt dangerous, almost treasonous. Thaddeus McAllister was not a man who questioned his own decisions. He made choices based on logic and numbers, and those choices were right because they were profitable. That was the equation. That was the only equation that mattered. Except it had not mattered to Margaret, and it had not mattered to Sarah. And now, watching his best hand drive away with a fortune that should have been what? His? He had not fed the donkey. He had not shown it kindness. He had fired the man who had, called him a thief, and thrown him off the property. What claim did Thaddeus have to anything that came from Bo's compassion? He found himself standing at the fence line, where he had first seen the herd this morning. The ground here was especially torn up, and in the soft earth he could make out individual hoofprints, large ones and small ones, the tracks of the jenny, the starving creature that had changed everything, were among them. He knelt down and traced one print with his finger, feeling the shape of it, the weight that had pressed into the earth. She had been dying. Bo had said that. Barely able to stand. And Bo had given her food, had sung to her, had offered comfort to a creature that could give nothing back. There was no profit in that act, no return on investment, just simple, uncomplicated mercy, and Thaddeus had called it theft. The realization settled over him like a physical weight. He stayed there, kneeling in the churned earth of his ruined pasture, and for the first time in 8 years, maybe longer, he let himself feel the full impact of what he had become. Not a rancher, not a steward of the land, just a man with a ledger, counting pennies while the world passed him by. God help me, he whispered to the empty field. What have I done? The mountains stood silent against the sky. The cattle grazed, unconcerned, and somewhere to the south, a gentle giant was leading a herd of rescued animals toward safety, his pockets full of the kind of wealth that Thaddeus had spent his life pursuing, but had never truly understood, the kind that mattered. The following days at the McAllister ranch passed in a strange, muted tension. The cattle returned to the south pasture once the donkeys left, but the ground was torn up, the grass trampled, and the whole space felt different somehow, as if the land itself remembered what had happened there. Thaddeus threw himself into damage control, calculating the cost of reseeding, checking each head of cattle for injuries or stress, updating his insurance claims. He worked from dawn until well past dark, filling every hour with tasks that kept his mind occupied and his hands busy. But the other hands noticed the change in him. He was quieter now, less quick to criticize. When Carlos accidentally spilled a bucket of grain, Thaddeus just looked at him for a long moment, then told him to clean it up. No docked pay, no lecture about waste. The hands exchanged confused glances, but did not question their good fortune. Maybe the boss was getting soft in his old age. Maybe the donkey incident had shaken something loose in him. On the third day, after Bo's departure, Chet found Thaddeus standing at the fence line of the south pasture, staring out at the mountains. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting golden across the grass, and the foreman approached carefully, unsure of his boss's mood. "Got those hay delivery numbers you wanted?" Chet said, offering a clipboard. Thaddeus took it, but did not look at it. "Chet, how long have you worked for my family?" 42 years, Chet said. "Started when your daddy ran the place. Did he ever do something like this? Fire a man for helping an animal?" Chet was quiet for a moment. "Your daddy was a hard man," he said carefully. "But he was fair. He understood that a ranch is more than just profit and loss. It is a way of life, and a way of life needs more than money to survive." "Meaning what?" "Meaning he knew when to bend," Chet said. "He knew that sometimes the right thing costs more than it earns, but you do it anyway because it is right. That is the difference between a rancher and a businessman. Boss. A businessman counts pennies. A rancher counts the things that matter." Thaddeus looked at him. "And I am just a businessman." "I did not say that. You did not have to." Thaddeus handed the clipboard back without looking at it. "How much would it cost to get Bo back? What would it take?" Chet shook his head slowly. "I do not think money would do it, boss. That boy left here with something heavier than a paycheck. He left here carrying your judgment. You called him a thief in front of God and everybody. That is not something you fix with a raise." "Then what do I do?" "I expect you would have to apologize," Chet said. "Really apologize. Not the kind where you are sorry things turned out bad for you. The kind where you are sorry for what you did to him." Thaddeus turned away from the fence. His jaw worked, his pride wrestling with something deeper and more honest. "I do not know if I can do that." "Then I guess you live with the consequences," Chet said gently, "like the rest of us do." That night, Thaddeus sat alone in his study with a glass of bourbon he did not drink. On his desk was a newspaper article he had printed from the county website. The headline read, "Local Cowboy recovers lost Army pack train, claims reward." The article included a photograph of Bo standing with a sheriff's deputy and a federal agent, the little Jenny beside him. Bo was smiling in the picture, a genuine, uncomplicated smile, and behind him, the herd of donkeys grazed in a temporary holding pen. The reward had been officially set at $75,000, the article said. Bo had signed over most of the animals to the Bureau of Land Management for auction and rehoming, but he had kept a dozen of them, including the Jenny. He planned to start a small livestock rescue operation on a piece of leased land near Durango. The article quoted him as saying, "Every animal deserves a chance, and every person has a responsibility to give that chance when they can." Thaddeus read the article 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, beneath the ledger where he tracked every penny spent on the ranch. He sat for a long time in the silence of his study, surrounded by photographs of prize cattle and framed awards for production efficiency. The walls felt closer than they used to. The room felt smaller. He thought about Margaret and Sarah, living in Denver without him. He thought about the long dining table where he ate alone. He thought about Bo kneeling in the hay barn, singing a hymn to a dying donkey, offering comfort to a creature that could give nothing back. And for the first time in many years, Thaddeus McAllister allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had become. The next morning, he did something he had not done in 8 years. He called his daughter. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice was wary. "Dad?" "Hello, Sarah," Thaddeus said. His voice was rougher than he intended. I wanted to ask if you and your mother would be willing to come out to the ranch for Thanksgiving. I know it is short notice. I know I have no right to ask, but I would like to try to—" He stopped, the words tangling in his throat. "I would like to try." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah said, very quietly, "What happened, Dad? You sound different." "I made a mistake," Thaddeus said. "A bad one. And it showed me some things about myself that I did not want to see. I am trying to be better. I do not know if I can be, but I would like to try." Another silence. Then, "I will talk to Mom. I cannot promise anything. That is all I am asking," Thaddeus said. "Thank you, Sarah." When he hung up, his hands were shaking, but it was a different kind of shaking than before. It felt less like fear, and more like the first trembling steps toward something he could not yet name. 2 weeks passed. Thaddeus hired a new hand, a young man from New Mexico, who was quiet and competent and asked few questions. The work of the ranch continued. The cattle fattened on the fall grass. The hay barn was restocked. The broken fences mended. The machinery serviced for winter. On the surface, everything returned to normal. But Chet noticed the small changes. Thaddeus stopped timing the men's lunch breaks. He approved a request from the Martinez brothers to take a weekend off for their mother's birthday. He even bought a case of beer for the bunkhouse, telling them it was for helping with the early season roundup. The hands accepted these gestures with cautious gratitude, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Thaddeus also started walking the property more, not to check fences or count cattle, but just to walk. He went out in the early mornings and the late evenings, moving slowly through the land that had been his family's for 3 generations. He noticed things he had not paid attention to in years. The way the light fell across the ridge at sunset. The sound of the creek running high with snowmelt from the mountains. The particular call of a hawk circling overhead. He began to see the ranch not as a collection of assets and liabilities, but as a living, breathing whole that existed beyond his control. One evening, he found himself at the hay barn where he had confronted Bo. The memory of that night sat heavy in his chest. He stood in the place where the donkey had eaten, where Bo had knelt and sung, and he tried to understand what he had been so afraid of in that moment. Why had simple kindness threatened him so deeply? The answer, when it came, was not comforting. He had been afraid because kindness couldn't be controlled. It operated outside the ledgers and the careful calculations. It introduced chaos into his ordered world, and chaos meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. He had built his empire of control to protect himself from pain, from loss, from the messiness of caring about things beyond his ability to manage. But in doing so, he had built a prison, and he had been living in it alone for a very long time. On the day before Thanksgiving, Sarah called. Her voice was tentative, but not hostile. "Mom and I talked. We will come out for Thanksgiving dinner. Just for the day. And Dad, we are doing this as a trial. If you are serious about trying, we need to see it, not just hear about it." "I understand," Thaddeus said. "Thank you. Both of you. Thank you. We will be there at noon," Sarah said. "And Dad, do not make this weird." He almost smiled. "I will do my best." He spent Thanksgiving morning in a state of controlled panic. He hired Rosa to come in and help cook the turkey and prepare the meal. He set the long dining table with Margaret's good china, the pieces she had left behind because she said they held too many bad memories. He put fresh flowers in a vase at the center of the table, then worried that flowers were too much, then left them anyway because taking them away felt like cowardice. When Sarah's car pulled up at noon, he was standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed. Sarah emerged first, taller than he remembered, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like her mother. Margaret came next, moving carefully, and Thaddeus felt something catch in his throat. She had aged. They both had. 8 years had passed, and they were strangers now, bound only by history and blood. "Hello," he said, and his voice came out too formal. "Thank you for coming." Sarah exchanged a glance with her mother. Then she walked up the porch steps and stood in front of him. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. She studied his face for a long moment. Then, without warning, she hugged him. It was brief and a little awkward, but it was real. Thaddeus stood frozen for half a second before his arms came up to return the embrace. When she stepped back, his eyes were wet. Margaret came up the steps more slowly. She did not hug him, but she nodded, a small acknowledgement. "Thaddeus, Margaret, it is good to see you." "Is it?" She looked at him with the directness that had first attracted him to her 40 years ago. "Because the last time we spoke, you told me I was being irrational for wanting you to spend Christmas with us, instead of here balancing your books." "I remember," Thaddeus said quietly, "and I am sorry. I should have been with you. I should have been with both of you." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Well, let us see how today goes." The meal was awkward at first, full of careful small talk and long silences. But as the afternoon wore on, something began to shift. Sarah told a story about her work at the non-profit where she did community outreach, and Thaddeus listened without interrupting, without offering advice. Just listened. Margaret mentioned that she had started painting again, taking classes at a local studio, and Thaddeus asked to see pictures of her work. She showed him photographs on her phone, and he looked at each one carefully, seeing in the bold colors and abstract shapes a freedom he had never understood. "They are beautiful," he said, and meant it. After dinner, they sat in the living room with coffee. The sun was setting, filling the room with amber light. Sarah looked around at the space, at the leather furniture, and the stone fireplace, and the mounted elk head over the mantel, and she said, "This place feels different. I cannot put my finger on it, but something is different." Thaddeus set down his coffee cup. "I fired a man 2 weeks ago for feeding a starving donkey. I called him a thief and threw him off my property. The next morning, 200 wild donkeys showed up to follow him off the ranch, and it turned out they were worth a $75,000 reward. I lost the reward, lost the respect of my hands, and had to face the fact that I had become exactly the kind of man I used to despise." Sarah and Margaret stared at him. Then Sarah said, "What?" "It is a long story," Thaddeus said, "but the short version is that I was wrong. I was cruel, and I am trying to learn from that." "You fired someone for showing mercy to an animal?" Margaret said slowly. "Yes." And that made you realize. What exactly? Thaddeus looked at her, at the woman he had loved and lost through his own stubbornness. That I have spent so much time trying to control everything that I forgot how to care about anything, that I built a profitable ranch and destroyed my family doing it, that I do not want to die alone in this big, empty house, surrounded by ledgers that no one will remember or care about. The room was very quiet. Then Margaret said, "That is quite a realization." "It is overdue," Thaddeus said. "About 8 years overdue." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the ranch, at the mountains beyond, and when she spoke, her voice was thick. "I used to love this place. When I was little, I loved everything about it. The horses, the cattle, the way the stars looked at night. And then somewhere along the way, it stopped being a home and started being a business. You stopped being my dad and started being the boss. And I hated it. I hated what this place did to you." "I know," Thaddeus said. "Do you?" She turned to face him. "Because I need to know you really understand. I need to know this is not just talk." "I am trying," Thaddeus said. "I do not have it figured out. I do not know how to undo 20 years of being the man I was. But I am trying, and I will keep trying for as long as it takes." Sarah looked at her mother. Margaret's face was unreadable. Then Margaret stood and walked over to Thaddeus. She looked down at him, her arms crossed, her expression stern. "You broke my heart," she said. "You chose this ranch over your family again and again. You made me feel like I was never enough, like nothing I did mattered because it could not be measured or quantified or put in a ledger. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "Yes," Thaddeus said. "I think I do now." "Good." Margaret's voice was sharp. "Because if you are serious about this, if you really want to try, then you need to understand that it is not enough to just feel bad. You have to change. Really change. And that means letting go of control. It means accepting that some things are more important than profit. It means being vulnerable and scared and doing it anyway." "I know," Thaddeus said again. "Do you?" Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. "Because I spent 34 years married to you, and I never once heard you admit you were wrong. I never once saw you choose us over this place. So forgive me if I am skeptical." "You should be skeptical," Thaddeus said. "I do not blame you, but I am asking for a chance, just one chance, to show you I can be better." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and familiar and strange all at once. "One chance," she said. "But if you waste it, Thaddeus, I am done. We both are. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "I understand." They stood there in the fading light, 3 people bound by blood and history and damage, trying to find a way back to something that might not even exist anymore. It was messy and uncertain, and nothing like the careful control Thaddeus had spent his life building. But it was real, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, real felt like enough. Sarah and Margaret left as the sun set, promising to come back for Christmas. Sarah hugged him again at the door, longer this time, and whispered, "I am proud of you, Dad, for trying." After they left, Thaddeus stood on the porch and watched their tail lights disappear down the drive. The ranch spread out around him in the gathering darkness, familiar and vast, and suddenly less lonely than it had been. He had a long way to go. He had bridges to rebuild, trust to earn back, and a lifetime of habits to unlearn. But he had something now that he had not had 2 weeks ago. He had hope, and he had a debt to pay. The next morning, Thaddeus loaded a thermos of coffee and a bag of supplies into his truck. He told Chet he would be gone for the day, and he drove south toward Durango, toward the leased land where Bo Lattimore was building his livestock rescue. It took him 2 hours to find the place, following directions he had gotten from the county extension office. The property was small, maybe 40 acres, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. There was a simple cabin, a barn in decent repair, and a series of corrals and pens. And everywhere there were animals, donkeys mostly, but also a few horses, a couple of ancient-looking cows, and a three-legged goat that watched Thaddeus's truck with suspicious eyes. The little Jenny, the one Bo had fed that night in the hay barn, stood near the cabin porch. She raised her head when Thaddeus's truck pulled up, her ears swiveling forward. Bo emerged from the barn carrying a hay bale on one shoulder. He stopped when he saw Thaddeus, and for a moment neither man moved. Then Bo set down the hay and walked over, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. McAllister," he said, "I did not expect to see you here." "I know," Thaddeus said. He climbed out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I came to apologize." Bo's eyebrows went up slightly. "Oh, I was wrong," Thaddeus said. The words came hard, but they came. "I was wrong to fire you. I was wrong to call you a thief. You did the right thing, and I punished you for it, because I was too stubborn and too afraid to see past my own bottom line. I am sorry, truly sorry." Bo studied him for a long moment. "That is a good start," he said finally. "Thank you. I also wanted to ask if you would consider coming back to the ranch," Thaddeus said. "I know I have no right to ask. I know you have a good thing going here. But I need—" He stopped, the admission sticking in his throat. "I need someone who remembers what matters. Someone who can help me be better than I have been." "You want me to come back and work for you?" Bo said slowly. "No," Thaddeus said. "I want you to come back and help me learn how to be the kind of rancher my father was. The kind who understands that a ranch is more than profit and loss. I am offering you a partnership, Bo. Equal shares, equal say. I will put it in writing. You bring your animals, you bring your rescue operation, and we build something together. Something that matters." Bo's expression was unreadable. "That is a big offer. It is the only fair offer," Thaddeus said. "You showed me something I needed to see. The least I can do is give you the means to keep doing what you are doing, and maybe, if I am lucky, you can teach an old man how to care again." The Jenny had wandered over during their conversation. She pushed her nose against Bo's hand, and he scratched her absently behind the ears. He looked out at his small valley, at the animals he had rescued, at the life he was building. Then he looked back at Thaddeus. "I will think about it," he said, "but I am not making any promises. You hurt me, Mr. McAllister. You made me feel small and worthless for doing what I knew was right. That is not something I forget easily." "I understand," Thaddeus said. "Take your time. I will be here when you decide." He turned to leave, but Bo called out, "Mr. McAllister." Thaddeus looked back. "Why now?" Bo asked. "Why did you change?" Thaddeus thought about the donkeys flooding his pasture, about his daughter's hug, about Margaret's hand in his. He thought about all the years he had spent counting pennies and losing everything that mattered. "Because I looked in the mirror," he said finally, "and I did not like what I saw, and I figured it was time to become someone better." Bo nodded slowly. "That is a good reason," he said. "Maybe the only good reason." Thaddeus drove back to the ranch with the windows down, cold air rushing through the cab. The mountains rose around him, ancient and indifferent, and the sky stretched wide and blue overhead. He did not know if Bo would accept his offer. He did not know if Margaret and Sarah would ever really trust him again. He did not know if he could truly change after 62 years of being who he was. But he knew he had to try, because the alternative, going back to the empty house, the silent dinners, the ledgers that accounted for everything, except the things that mattered, that was no longer an option. When he pulled up to the ranch house, Chet was waiting on the porch. "Boss, everything okay?" "I do not know," Thaddeus said honestly, "but I think it might be. Eventually. That is good enough for now," Chet said. He handed Thaddeus a cup of coffee, and they stood together, watching the sun climb over the mountains. Two old men learning to hope again. The days that followed were quiet ones. Thaddeus continued his walks around the property, continued his small acts of unexpected kindness toward his hands. He found himself thinking less about the ledgers and more about the land itself, about the cattle that grazed on it, about the people who worked it. He started asking the hands about their families, their plans, their dreams. He learned that Tommy was saving up for a down payment on a small place of his own. He learned that Raymond's daughter was studying veterinary medicine in Fort Collins. He learned that Carlos and Luis sent money home to Mexico every month to support their elderly mother. These were things he had never bothered to know before. They did not affect productivity or profit margins, but they made the men real to him in a way they had not been, and he found himself caring about their lives in a way that surprised him. He also found himself returning, again and again, to the hay barn. He would stand in the spot where Bo had knelt beside the starving Jenny, and he would try to imagine what it had felt like to see a suffering creature and respond with nothing but compassion. No calculation, no consideration of cost. Just simple, uncomplicated kindness. It was a way of being in the world that Thaddeus had never allowed himself, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much it had cost him to live without it. He had gained a profitable ranch and lost a family. He had gained control and lost connection. He had gained everything he thought he wanted and found himself utterly alone. But maybe, just maybe, it was not too late to change that. Maybe, if he worked hard enough, if he stayed open enough, if he kept trying, even when it was hard and uncomfortable and nothing like the life he had built, maybe he could find his way back to something that resembled wholeness. 3 weeks after his visit to Bo's rescue, Thaddeus received a phone call. It was a Saturday morning, and he was in the barn helping Walt repair a broken water trough when Chet came to find him. "Boss, you got a call. It is Bo Lattimore." Thaddeus felt his heart skip. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked to the office phone, trying to calm the nervousness in his chest. "Bo? Mr. McAllister." Bo's voice was warm but cautious. "I have been thinking about your offer, and I would like to take you up on it, with some conditions." "Name them," Thaddeus said. "I want it in writing. A real partnership, equal shares like you said. I want the rescue operation to be part of the ranch, not just something we do on the side. And I want a say in how we treat the hands, the animals, all of it. If I am going to help you change, I need to know you are serious." "You have my word," Thaddeus said. "I will have the lawyers draw up the papers this week." There was a pause. Then Bo said, "All right then. I will be there next week." "And Mr. McAllister?" "Yes, thank you. For apologizing. For trying. It means something." After he hung up, Thaddeus stood for a moment, with his hand still on the phone. Then he walked back out to where Chet and Walt were working. "Bo is coming back," he said simply, "as my partner. We are going to do things differently around here." Chet smiled, the first real smile Thaddeus had seen from him in weeks. "About damn time, boss. About damn time." 3 weeks later, on a bright December morning, a battered pickup truck pulled up the drive to the McAllister ranch. In the back were supplies, tools, and a scrawny Jenny donkey who had started it all. Bo Lattimore climbed out of the cab and stood for a moment, looking at the ranch house, the barns, the wide pastures stretching toward the mountains. Then he smiled, that gentle, uncomplicated smile, and walked up to where Thaddeus waited on the porch. "I figured we could give it a try," Bo said. "See if an old tightwad and a soft-hearted cowboy can make something work." Thaddeus held out his hand. "I think we can," he said, "if we are both willing to learn." They shook on it, and in that moment, something shifted. The ranch was still the same land, the same buildings, the same mountains rising in the distance, but it felt different now. It felt like a place where second chances were possible, where kindness could grow alongside profit, where two men, one learning to open his heart and one learning to trust again, could build something that mattered. The Jenny brayed from the truck bed, loud and clear, and Thaddeus found himself laughing. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed but genuine. Bo joined in, and the sound of their laughter carried across the valley, mixing with the wind and the cattle lowing and the creek running high with snowmelt. It sounded like home. It sounded like a beginning. Thaddeus and Bo spent the first month working out the details of their partnership. Lawyers drew up papers that split the ranch 50-50, with provisions for the livestock rescue operation that would run alongside the cattle business. They converted the old hay barn into a rehabilitation center for injured or neglected animals, installing proper stalls and a small medical area. Bo brought in a veterinarian from Durango who agreed to consult on the rescue cases, and together they started accepting animals that other ranchers and farmers could no longer care for. The other hands watched these changes with a mixture of confusion and cautious optimism. Thaddeus was different now. He still kept his ledgers, still tracked expenses, but he no longer flew into a rage over small inefficiencies. When Luis accidentally left a gate open and 3 cattle wandered into the neighboring property, Thaddeus just asked him to retrieve them and be more careful next time. No docked pay, no lecture. The hands began to relax, to joke more freely, to take pride in their work, rather than simply fearing the consequences of mistakes. Chet, who had seen 3 generations of McAllisters run this ranch, pulled Thaddeus aside one evening as they were checking the perimeter fence. "Your daddy would be proud," the old foreman said. "This is what he always wanted this place to be. A working ranch that also gave back. I wish I had understood that sooner," Thaddeus said. "Better late than never," Chet replied. "And you got time yet to make it right." The first animal Bo brought to the rescue was an old mare, 30 years if she was a day, whose owner had passed away and left no one to care for her. She was thin and arthritic, and most people would have put her down. But Bo gentled her, fed her carefully, and worked with the vet to manage her pain. Within 2 weeks, she was moving more easily, and there was a light back in her eyes. Thaddeus found himself spending time in the rescue barn, watching Bo work. The big man had a way with animals that went beyond skill or experience. It was something fundamental, a deep well of patience and empathy that never seemed to run dry. He talked to the animals as he worked, his voice low and soothing, telling them they were safe now, that no one would hurt them again. "How do you do it?" Thaddeus asked one evening. They were standing outside the barn, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "How do you care so much and not get destroyed by it?" Bo thought for a moment. "I guess I figure the caring is the point," he said. "The world is hard enough without people adding to the hardness. If I can make one animal's life a little better, one person's day a little easier, then that is enough. I do not need to save everyone. I just need to do what I can with what I have." "That seems like a hard way to live," Thaddeus said. "Always giving, never counting the cost. Is it harder than living the way you did?" Bo asked gently. "Counting everything, trusting nothing, keeping everyone at arm's length?" Thaddeus did not answer, but he knew Bo was right. The old way had been harder. It had been lonelier, and it had cost him everything that mattered. Christmas came, and Sarah and Margaret returned to the ranch. This time they stayed for 3 days, sleeping in the guest rooms that Thaddeus had cleaned and prepared himself. He showed them the rescue operation, introduced them to Bo, and let them see the changes he was making. Sarah was particularly taken with the old mare, spending hours in the barn, brushing her coat and talking to her in soft tones. "She reminds me of the horse I had when I was little," Sarah said. "The one you sold when I went to college." "I remember," Thaddeus said. "I told you it was not practical to keep a horse you were not riding." "You were wrong," Sarah said. "It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. She was my friend. I loved her, and you sold her like she was just another asset." "I know," Thaddeus said. "I am sorry, Sarah. I was wrong about a lot of things." She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "I know you are trying, Dad. I can see it, and I appreciate it. But you need to understand that trust doesn't come back overnight. You hurt me. You hurt Mom. And it is going to take time for us to believe that this version of you is real." "I understand," Thaddeus said. "I will wait as long as it takes." On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts in the living room. Thaddeus gave Margaret a set of professional-grade paintbrushes and a gift certificate to an art supply store in Denver. He gave Sarah a donation in her name to the non-profit where she worked. They gave him a framed photograph of the three of them from Sarah's childhood, back when they had been a family. Thaddeus looked at the picture for a long time, at his younger self smiling with his arm around Margaret, at Sarah grinning gap-toothed on his shoulders. He did not recognize that man anymore. That man had been happy. That man had not yet learned to count every penny and weigh every moment against the bottom line. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "I will treasure this." After they left, Thaddeus hung the photograph on the wall of his study, right above his desk, where he would see it every day. It would remind him of what he was working toward. It would remind him that some things were worth more than money. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold winds that swept down from the mountains. The work continued. Cattle to feed, fences to mend, animals to care for. Bo brought in more rescues: a blind goat, a dog with 3 legs, a pair of ancient sheep that no one wanted. Each animal found a place in the barn, and each one received the same patient, careful attention. Thaddeus found himself helping more with the rescue work. He learned how to mix special feeds for animals with dental problems, how to wrap bandages around injured legs, how to move slowly and speak softly, so as not to frighten creatures that had been hurt by humans before. It was humbling work, messy and unglamorous, and it paid nothing, but it felt more meaningful than anything he had done in years. One evening in late January, as they were finishing the feeding, Bo turned to Thaddeus and said, "You know, I was wrong about you." "How so?" "I thought you were just a mean old man who cared about nothing but money," Bo said. "But you are not. You were just scared. Scared of losing control, scared of being hurt, scared of caring too much. And fear makes people do cruel things." "That is generous of you," Thaddeus said. "More generous than I deserve." "Maybe," Bo agreed. "But I have learned that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work, so I would rather forgive and move forward." "Thank you," Thaddeus said, "for giving me a second chance." "We all need second chances," Bo said. "Every one of us. That is what grace is, I think. Getting what you do not deserve and being grateful enough to pass it on." They walked back to the main house together through the snow, their breath steaming in the cold air. Inside, Rosa had left a pot of stew on the stove and fresh bread on the counter. Thaddeus ladled out 2 bowls, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about the work ahead, the animals that needed care, the fence line that needed repair in the spring. It was a simple meal, a simple conversation, but it was not lonely, and that, Thaddeus realized, made all the difference. In February, a reporter from the local newspaper came to do a story on the rescue operation. She interviewed both Thaddeus and Bo, took photographs of the animals, and wrote a piece that ran on the front page of the weekend edition. The headline read, "From Tightwad to Tender-Hearted, How One Cowboy Changed a Ranch and a Man's Life." Thaddeus cringed when he read it, but Bo just laughed. "They are not wrong," he said. "You did change. That is worth celebrating." The article brought attention. Other ranchers started calling, asking if they could bring animals that needed help. A local feed store donated several tons of hay. A retired veterinarian offered to volunteer her time once a week. The rescue grew, and with it, the sense that the McAllister Ranch was becoming something more than just a business. It was becoming a community. Sarah called after she read the article. "I showed it to Mom," she said. She cried. "Good tears or bad tears?" Thaddeus asked. "Good ones, I think," Sarah said. She said it reminded her of the man she married, the one she thought she lost. "Tell her," Thaddeus said, and he had to stop and clear his throat. "Tell her I am working on finding that man again. Tell her I am not there yet, but I am trying." "I will tell her," Sarah said. "And Dad, keep trying. It matters." Spring came slowly, the snow melting in patches, the grass greening where the sun hit longest. The cattle moved back out to the far pastures, and the work shifted to calving season and fence repair. Bo hired 2 part-time workers to help with the rescue operation, young people from town who wanted to learn about animal care. The barn was full now, every stall occupied, and there was a waiting list of animals that needed placement. One morning in late March, Thaddeus woke to the sound of braying outside his window. He pulled on his robe and went to the porch, and there, standing in the front yard, was the little Jenny. She had somehow gotten out of her pen and wandered up to the main house. She looked at Thaddeus with her large, dark eyes, and brayed again, insistent. "What do you want?" Thaddeus asked. She walked to the porch steps and brayed a third time. Thaddeus sighed, went inside, and returned with a carrot from the kitchen. He broke it into pieces and fed it to her, and she munched contentedly, her ears swiveling with pleasure. As he stood there in his bathrobe, feeding a donkey on his front porch in the early morning light, Thaddeus realized something. He was happy, genuinely, simply happy in a way he had not been in decades. "You started all this, you know," he told the Jenny. "You and Bo. You turned my whole world upside down." The Jenny just looked at him and reached for another piece of carrot. "Yeah," Thaddeus said softly. "You are welcome." By summer, the McAllister ranch was operating at full capacity. The cattle business remained profitable, but it was no longer the sole focus. The rescue operation had taken on a life of its own, and Thaddeus found himself spending as much time there as he did managing the cattle. He still kept his ledgers, still tracked the numbers, but the bottom line was no longer the only measure of success. Now there were other measures. The number of animals helped. The people who volunteered their time, the kids from town who came to learn about caring for creatures that could not care for themselves. Margaret and Sarah visited more frequently now, sometimes staying for a week or more. Margaret had started painting scenes from the ranch, capturing the mountains and the animals in bold, expressive strokes. She set up an easel on the porch and worked, while Thaddeus and Bo went about their daily tasks. There was something healing in her presence, something that felt like forgiveness without words. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Margaret said, "I think I could come back. Not permanently, not yet, but maybe for longer visits. Maybe we could try again." Thaddeus looked at her, and his heart felt too big for his chest. "I would like that," he said. "More than I can say. It will not be easy," Margaret warned. "We have a lot of history, a lot of hurt." "I know," Thaddeus said, "but I am willing to work at it. For as long as it takes." She reached over and took his hand, and they sat like that as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. It was not a grand gesture or a dramatic reconciliation. It was just two people, still broken in places, still learning how to trust again, choosing to try. And that, Thaddeus thought, was maybe the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss, too. Thaddeus started joining them for meals in the bunkhouse sometimes, sitting at the long table and listening to their stories. He learned about Carlos's dream of opening a small restaurant someday, serving the recipes his grandmother had taught him. He learned about Tommy's rodeo career, the injuries and near misses, and the stubborn determination that kept him going back. He learned about Raymond's quiet faith, the way he prayed before every meal and carried a worn Bible in his saddlebag. These men were not just labor costs anymore. They were people with hopes and dreams and struggles. And Thaddeus found that knowing them, really, knowing them, made him a better boss and a better man. One afternoon in July, Chet pulled Thaddeus aside after they finished checking the north fence line. The old foreman's eyes were bright, and there was something in his expression that Thaddeus could not quite read. "I need to tell you something," Chet said, "and I want you to really hear it." "All right," Thaddeus said, suddenly worried. "What is it?" "I have been on this ranch for 42 years, Chet said. "I worked for your daddy, and I have worked for you. And in all that time, I have never been prouder to be here than I am right now. What you have done, what you and Bo have built, it is something special. Your daddy would have loved it. Hell, I love it. And I wanted you to know that." Thaddeus felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Chet. That means more than you know." "You are a good man, boss," Chet said. "You always were. You just forgot for a while. But you remembered, and that takes courage." After Chet walked away, Thaddeus stood alone by the fence, looking out at the land that had been his family's for 3 generations. The sun was bright, the grass was green, and everywhere he looked there was life. Cattle grazing peacefully, horses running in the far pasture, and in the rescue barn, animals that had been abandoned or abused finding safety and care. This was what a ranch should be, he thought. Not just a business, but a place of healing. A place where second chances were possible. A place where kindness mattered more than profit. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The firing of Bo, the donkeys flooding his pasture, the painful realization of what he had become, the slow, difficult work of change. And he understood now that the donkeys had not been a punishment. They had been a gift, a wake-up call, a chance to see himself clearly and choose a different path. That evening, Thaddeus called a meeting with all the hands. They gathered in the main barn, curious and a little nervous. Thaddeus rarely called meetings, and when he did, it usually meant someone was in trouble or there was bad news about the business. But when they were all assembled, Thaddeus just stood there for a moment, looking at each of them in turn, Chet with his weathered face and patient eyes, Carlos and Luis with their easy smiles, Tommy with his rodeo dreams still shining in his young face, Raymond with his quiet dignity, Walt with his gruff exterior hiding a good heart, and Bo, standing at the back, watching with that calm, knowing expression. "I wanted to say thank you," Thaddeus began, "to all of you, for sticking with this place through some hard times, for putting up with me when I was not the boss you deserved, and for being part of what we are building here now." The men exchanged glances, surprised. "This ranch is changing," Thaddeus continued. "It is becoming something different, something better, and that is because of all of you. Your work, your dedication, your willingness to care about more than just a paycheck. I have learned a lot from you this past year, about what matters, about what it means to be a good man, and not just a successful one." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I am also announcing that effective immediately, everyone is getting a raise, 20% across the board, and we are starting a profit-sharing program. When the ranch does well, you all do well, because you are not just employees. You are partners in this. You are family." The silence that followed was profound. Then Carlos started clapping, and the others joined in. The sound echoed through the barn, and Thaddeus felt something warm and bright expand in his chest. This was what it felt like to do the right thing. This was what it felt like to lead with your heart, instead of just your head. After the meeting, Bo walked with Thaddeus back to the main house. The stars were coming out, bright and clear in the summer sky. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Bo said, "You did good in there. I should have done it years ago," Thaddeus said. "Maybe," Bo agreed. "But you did it now. That is what matters." They reached the porch, and Thaddeus turned to look back at the ranch. The lights in the bunkhouse were on, and he could hear the muffled sound of laughter and conversation. The rescue barn was quiet, the animals settled for the night, and somewhere in the darkness, the little Jenny was probably sleeping in her pen, content and safe. "Thank you," Thaddeus said to Bo, "for coming back, for giving me a chance, for helping me become someone I can be proud of." "You did the hard work," Bo said. "I just showed up." "You showed up when it mattered," Thaddeus said, "and that made all the difference." They said good night, and Thaddeus went inside to the house that felt less empty now, less like a prison and more like a home. He sat in his study for a while, looking at the photograph of his younger self with Margaret and Sarah, and he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would call Margaret and ask her if she would consider moving back to the ranch. Not right away, but soon, when she was ready. Because he was ready now, ready to share his life instead of just controlling it, ready to build something real instead of just something profitable, ready to be the man she had married all those years ago, the one who knew how to love and laugh and care about more than just the bottom line. It was time to come home, all the way home, and for the first time in a very long time, Thaddeus McAllister believed it was possible. Thaddeus called Margaret the next morning. His hands were shaking as he dialed the number, and he had to remind himself to breathe. This was not a business negotiation. This was not about control or strategy. This was about opening his heart and asking for something he desperately wanted, but had no right to demand. "Hello?" Margaret's voice was cautious. "Margaret, it is Thaddeus. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything is... Yes, everything is fine. Better than fine, actually." He paused, gathering his courage. "I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to know that there is no pressure here. You can say no, and it will not change anything between us. I will still be grateful for the chance you have already given me." "Thaddeus, you are making me nervous." "What is it? Would you consider moving back to the ranch?" The words came out in a rush. "Not right away, whenever you are ready. But I have been thinking about it, and I realize that all the changes I have made, all the work Beau and I have done, none of it means anything if I am still living here alone. I want to share this with you. I want to build a real life here, not just a business, and I cannot do that without you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long that Thaddeus thought she might have hung up. Then she said, very quietly, "You really have changed, have not you?" "I am trying," Thaddeus said. "Every day I am trying, and I know I have a long way to go. But I love you, Margaret. I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it, and I want the chance to remember, to do it right this time." He heard her take a shaky breath. "I need to think about it," she said. "This is not a small thing, Thaddeus. You are asking me to come back to the place where I was so unhappy for so long, to trust that you will not turn back into the man you were." "I know," Thaddeus said, "and I am not asking for an answer now. Take all the time you need. But I wanted you to know that the invitation is there, that I want you here, that this place feels empty without you." "Can I come visit?" Margaret asked. "Before I decide, spend a week or two and see what it is really like now?" "Of course," Thaddeus said. "Come whenever you want. Stay as long as you want. Sarah, too, if she would like." "All right," Margaret said. "Give me a few weeks to arrange things here." "And Thaddeus?" "Yes, thank you for asking. Really asking, not just assuming or demanding. That matters." After they hung up, Thaddeus sat for a long time with the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He had made himself vulnerable. He had admitted need. He had asked for something without knowing if he would receive it. And instead of feeling weak, he felt strong, stronger than he had in years. 3 weeks later, Margaret arrived at the ranch with 2 suitcases and a nervous smile. Thaddeus met her at the car, and for a moment, they just stood there looking at each other. Then she said, "Well, show me what you have done with the place." He gave her the full tour, the rescue barn with its recovering animals, the updated bunkhouse where the hands lived in better conditions now, the south pasture that had been reseeded and was thriving again, the fence lines that had been repaired and reinforced. And, throughout it all, he told her about the changes in his thinking, the lessons he had learned, the man he was trying to become. Margaret listened without interrupting, and Thaddeus could not read her expression. When they finished the tour, they stood on the porch of the main house, looking out at the ranch as the sun began to set. "It is different," Margaret said finally. "I can feel it. The whole energy of the place is different." "Is that good or bad?" Thaddeus asked. "It is good," she said. "It is what I always wanted this place to be, what I thought it could be when we were young and first starting out." She turned to look at him. "You have done something remarkable here, Thaddeus. You have changed yourself and changed this ranch, and I am proud of you for that." "Does that mean—" "It means I am willing to try," Margaret said. "I will stay for 2 weeks, and we will see how it feels. No promises beyond that, but I am willing to try." Thaddeus felt tears prick his eyes. "That is all I am asking for, a chance." "Then let us make the most of it," Margaret said. She took his hand, and they stood there together on the porch, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. And for the first time in 8 years, Thaddeus felt like he was home. Really, truly home. The 2 weeks that followed were both wonderful and terrifying for Thaddeus. He wanted desperately to show Margaret that he had changed, that the ranch was different, that they could build a life here together. But he also knew that trying too hard, forcing it, would only push her away. So he tried to just be present, to be himself, to let her see the man he was becoming without performance or pretense. Margaret spent her days painting on the porch, walking the property, and helping in the rescue barn. She seemed drawn to the animals, especially the ones who were most broken, most in need of care. Thaddeus watched her gentle and abused horse, her voice soft and patient, and he saw in her the same compassion that Bo carried. It was a quality he was learning to cultivate in himself, but in Margaret it came naturally. It always had. He had just been too blind to see it. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together in the kitchen, something they had not done in years. Margaret made her famous pot roast, and Thaddeus surprised her by remembering how she liked her coffee in the morning, black with just a touch of honey. They talked about small things and big things, about Sarah's work in Denver, about Margaret's painting, about the ranch and its future, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk about themselves. "Do you remember our first year here?" Margaret asked one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "We were so young and so stupid, and so sure we could make this place into something special." "I remember," Thaddeus said. "We used to sit right here and plan out our lives. How many cattle we would run, how many kids we would have, what we would name them. We named Sarah after your grandmother," Margaret said. "I loved that. I loved that you wanted to honor your family that way." "We were going to have 3 kids," Thaddeus said. "And then after Sarah, I kept saying we needed to wait. We needed to get the ranch stable first. And then we never did," Margaret finished. "And I resented you for that, for choosing the ranch over our family again and again." "I am sorry," Thaddeus said. "I cannot change the past. But if you come back, if you give me that chance, I promise you, I will never choose the ranch over you again. Not ever." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I believe you mean that. And that is what makes this so hard, because I want to believe it will be different. But I am scared, Thaddeus. I am scared of coming back here and watching you slip back into your old ways. I am scared of losing myself again in this place." "I am scared too," Thaddeus admitted. "I am scared I will disappoint you, that I will fail, that the man I am right now will not be strong enough to stay this way when things get hard. But I think we have to try anyway, because the alternative is spending the rest of our lives apart, and I cannot do that anymore. I do not want to do that." Margaret reached over and took his hand. "Neither do I," she said. The next day, Sarah drove up from Denver to spend the weekend at the ranch. When she arrived and saw her mother there, saw her parents working side by side in the garden, saw them laughing together over some shared joke, she started crying. "What is it?" Margaret asked, alarmed. "Sweetheart, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Everything is right. This is what I always wanted. This is what I dreamed about when I was little. You two together, happy, making this place feel like home. I just never thought I would actually see it." Thaddeus pulled his daughter into a hug, and Margaret joined them, and the 3 of them stood there in the garden, holding each other, a family beginning to heal. That weekend, they worked together in the rescue barn. Sarah helped Bo treat a lame goat, while Margaret sketched the animals, and Thaddeus mucked out stalls. It was hard, dirty work, and at one point, Thaddeus looked up to find Sarah watching him with a strange expression. "What?" he asked. "I am just trying to figure out who you are," Sarah said, "because the dad I grew up with would never have been caught dead shoveling manure. He would have paid someone else to do it and tracked the expense in his ledger. That dad was an idiot," Thaddeus said simply. "This dad knows better." Sarah smiled. "Yeah, he does." On the last night of Margaret's visit, they sat together on the porch again. The summer air was warm and still, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Margaret had been quiet all evening, and Thaddeus knew she was making her decision. He did not push. He just sat beside her and waited. Finally, she said, "I will come back. Not permanently at first, but I will come back for a few months and see how it goes. And if it works, if you can keep being this man, then maybe we can try for real." "Thank you," Thaddeus said, and his voice broke on the words. "Thank you for giving me this chance. Do not waste it," Margaret said, but she was smiling when she said it. And when she kissed him, it felt like coming home. As summer turned to fall and the year completed its circle, Thaddeus found himself back on his porch one September morning, coffee in hand, surveying his land. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The rescue barn hummed with activity as Beau and the volunteers went about their morning chores. From the kitchen, he could hear Margaret humming as she made breakfast, her presence in the house a gift he did not take for granted. The ranch looked much the same as it had a year ago. Same mountains, same grass, same wide sky, but everything had changed. Thaddeus had changed. He was still learning, still stumbling, still making mistakes, but he was no longer alone. He was no longer counting pennies instead of blessings. And when he looked out at his domain now, he did not see assets and liabilities. He saw home. A truck pulled up the drive, and Beau climbed out, waving. "Boss, got another one for us. Old plow horse from the Anderson place. He is pretty rough, but I think we can help him. Bring him in," Thaddeus called back. "We will make room." As Beau unloaded the horse, the little Jenny trotted over to greet the newcomer, her gait still a bit stiff, but her spirit undimmed. She sniffed the horse, brayed a welcome, and led him toward the barn. Thaddeus watched her go, this small creature who had changed his life by simply needing help, and he felt a gratitude so profound it bordered on reverence. "Thank you," he whispered to the morning air, to the Jenny, to whatever force in the universe had sent her to his ranch on that cold September night a year ago. "Thank you for showing me what matters." Margaret came out onto the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Thaddeus and stood beside him, her shoulder touching his. They watched the ranch come to life in the morning light, and neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. Everything that mattered was already said in the simple act of standing there together. "It is exactly a year today," Margaret said finally, "since you fired Beau, since the donkeys came." "I know," Thaddeus said. "I have been thinking about that, about how much has changed. Do you regret it? Any of it?" Thaddeus thought about the question. Did he regret firing Beau? Of course. That had been cruel and wrong. But did he regret the journey that followed? The painful realization of what he had become? The difficult work of change? The rebuilding of his family and his life? "No," he said finally. "I regret the pain I caused. I regret the years I wasted. But I do not regret where it brought me. I do not regret becoming this man instead of the one I was." Margaret nodded. "Good answer." Sarah was planning to visit next weekend, and she was bringing someone with her, a young man she had been dating for 6 months, someone she wanted her parents to meet. Thaddeus felt nervous about it, but also excited. This was what normal families did. They met each other's partners. They shared meals and stories. They built connections across generations. The rescue operation was thriving. They had helped over 50 animals in the past year, and word was spreading. Ranchers from 3 counties away were calling now, asking for help with animals they could not care for. Beau had hired 2 more full-time staff, both young people with a passion for animal welfare, and they were planning to expand the barn in the spring to accommodate more rescues. The cattle business was doing well too, better than well, actually. Thaddeus had discovered that treating his hands with respect and dignity led to better work, fewer accidents, and higher morale. The ranch was more productive now than it had been under his iron-fisted control. Profit and compassion, it turned out, were not mutually exclusive. They reinforced each other. Chet had announced that he would be retiring in the spring. 43 years was long enough, he said, and he wanted to spend his remaining time with his grandchildren. Thaddeus had offered him a generous pension and a small cabin on the ranch property, where he could live rent-free for as long as he wanted. Chet had accepted with tears in his eyes. "Your daddy would have done the same," the old foreman had said. "You have become the man he raised you to be. Took you a while, but you got there." The words had meant more to Thaddeus than any business award or production certificate ever could. In the canyon lands to the south, the herd of wild donkeys still roamed free. Occasionally, Thaddeus would see them from a distance, moving through the draws and valleys, a living reminder of the lesson they had taught him. He never approached them. They were free, and they deserved to stay that way. But he thought of them often, and he silently thanked them for the chaos they had brought to his carefully ordered world. That evening, as the sun began to set, Thaddeus and Margaret walked down to the rescue barn together. They checked on the new horse, made sure all the animals had food and water, and said goodnight to Bo, who was finishing up his rounds. "You two make a good team," Bo said, smiling at them. "We always did," Margaret said. "We just forgot for a while." Walking back to the house, they passed the spot where the donkeys had gathered that miraculous morning. The grass had grown back thick and green, and there was no sign now of the churning chaos that had been here. But Thaddeus remembered. He remembered every detail, and he was grateful for it. "I love you," he said to Margaret. The words came easily now, without calculation or fear. "I love you too," she replied, "and I am proud of you, for changing, for trying, for becoming someone worthy of that love." They reached the house and climbed the porch steps together. Inside, dinner was waiting. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more animals to care for, more fences to mend. But tonight, there was this: family, home, connection, all the things that money could not buy, but that made life worth living. The mountains stood silent against the darkening sky. The wind carried the scent of grass and animals and possibility. And on the McAllister ranch, where once only profit had mattered, kindness now grew like wildflowers after rain, unplanned, unstoppable, and more beautiful than anything that could be bought or sold. Thaddeus McAllister, who had built an empire on control and calculation, had finally learned the most important lesson of all. You could not buy grace. You could not earn redemption through careful bookkeeping. But if you opened your heart, if you chose compassion over convenience and people over profit, sometimes, just sometimes, the world gave you back more than you ever deserved, and that was worth everything.